Hello, my name is Dr Balram Rathish. I'm a founding member of Warriors Against COVID-19, and today I'm here to talk to you about herd immunity, which you may have heard a lot about with regards to COVID-19. How herd immunity works is that, let's take an example. Suppose around 80% of the population is immune to a particular disease, any infectious disease for that matter. Now, suppose that disease suddenly crops up in one of the people in that population where 80% of the people are immune. So, because 80%, which is 4 out of 5. So, if you take 5 people, 4 out of them are immune, while that one person is still susceptible to that disease. So, what happens is that when that disease pops up, if this person who has the disease comes in contact with any of these 4 people who are immune, the disease gets stopped there. It does not transmit to the next person. It's in the very less likely scenario where the person comes in contact with that one person who's not immune, that the disease carries on to the next person. But then again, the chances again go back to the second person who has contracted the disease meeting with either an immune person where the chance is 4 by 5, or meeting with a person who is susceptible where the chance is 1 by 5. So it's a simple mathematical probability. So when 4 out of 5 people are immune to a disease, it is highly unlikely that this disease will progress in that community. So that is how herd immunity works. You've been probably hearing a lot about the concept of breaking the chain in the COVID situation, where it means completely something else. But even in herd immunity, we can talk about breaking the chain. So I have a image here to get it across a little bit more. So now let's consider 2 populations. So this is a susceptible population where no vaccine is available, an unvaccinated population, and this is a vaccinated population. So we are going to take the same disease and look at how it will run through these 2 populations. So in the first population, see, the yellow color represents people who are affected by the disease. So in the first scenario where there is no vaccination, one person gets the disease, who passes it on to the next person, who passes it on to the next person, and like that it keeps continuing. So it keeps on going like this without any stopping because nobody is immune. So this is what happens. This is what is happening with COVID-19. Now let's look at the second situation where it's the same, very similar sort of population, but here the green color represents people who are immune, people who have been vaccinated and have immunity to that disease. So it starts off similarly, it goes on till it reaches a person who is immune, and here you can see the X, which means that the disease is arrested. It cannot move on to the next person, and when it keeps on hitting people who are immune, the disease gets stopped in its tracks. It does not keep transmitting in the community, and this outbreak is contained by itself. So that's the difference between a population with herd immunity and population without herd immunity. To understand what percentage or what fraction of people need to develop immunity to COVID-19, to develop herd immunity to the disease, we need to understand a basic epidemiological concept known as R0, which is R followed by a 0. So R0 is also called the basic reproductive number. So very simply put, R0 is the number of people a person with that disease can infect. To explain it simply, suppose that a disease X has an R0 of 2. So a person who gets the disease X will pass on the disease to 2 other people if left unchecked. That is what R0 means. So the R0 for COVID-19 has still not been established because we are still getting to know the disease, and there are a lot of variables. So what WHO has found at this point in time is that the R0 of COVID-19 is somewhere between 2 and 2.5. But again, it's not a final number because we are still finding the facts, and it might change later on. So something that we use more commonly in epidemiology is what we call as RE. RE is the effective reproductive rate. Effective reproductive rate is a dynamic variable. It keeps changing depending on, for example, a lockdown. If a lockdown is instituted in a country, the RE comes down. That is because the virus finds it a bit more difficult to transmit among people because people are not interacting as much as if there is no lockdown. So RE is an important concept. So RE is basically, if you take take a mathematical formula. So RE is R naught into S, where S is the susceptibility of population, the number of, or the fraction of people in a population who are susceptible to that particular disease. So it's a very simple mathematical formula. So as an example, to understand it easier, we'll take a couple of examples and see what RE becomes. So before that, herd immunity is achieved. We call it as herd immunity being achieved when the RE drops below 1. So the RE goes below 1, it means that the disease can be arrested because of the herd immunity. So we look at the example with this mathematical formula. So we'll take the first example where susceptibility is 0.8, which means that 80% of the population is susceptible to getting the disease. So 80% are not immune to the disease. So when you take that, when you substitute 0.8, and we are taking the R naught as 2, which is the case as WHO puts it in COVID-19, we get an RE of 1.6, which is above 1. So which means that there is not enough herd immunity to arrest the disease. Now we take a second example where the susceptibility is 0.2, which means that only 20% of the population is susceptible to the disease. 80% are immune, where this is where the concept of herd immunity comes in. When 80% become immune, and we keep the same R naught as above 2, we get an RE of 0.4, which is very, very less than 1, and we can say that this population has enough herd immunity to stop the disease. So should we be attempting to develop herd immunity without an available vaccine? The simple answer to that would be no, we should not be attempting to do that. To explain this, let's look at some very basic math again. So the population of India is 1.3 billion, which is 1300 million people. Now earlier we discussed that we need 40% of Indians to become immune to COVID-19 for us to develop effective herd immunity. Now 40% of 1.3 billion is around 520 million people. Now, it is important to understand that we need 520 million people to become immune to COVID-19 for us to be having an effective herd immunity. This is immunity. It is not infectivity. So, for 520 million people to become immune, we are looking at additional people becoming infected at some point in time. This additional number of people is what is called as overshoot in epidemiology. So, I'll explain what overshoot is. So if you can see this graph, you can see that in this particular example, in the y-axis they have taken the fraction, which is 1 or 100% of the population. So they have taken a curve which shows the effect of a certain disease. Let's take the example of COVID-19. So in this particular example, they have shown that around 0.6 or 60% of the population have to develop herd immunity for the curve to become flat. But if you notice, the curve does not become flat at the 60% mark. It becomes flat at the 80% mark. Now, why is that? What is this difference of 20%? Now, this difference of 20% is what is called as overshoot. So this overshoot happens because of a very simple reason. It happens because when the number of people who are infected reaches 60%, there is not enough people who are immune for the disease to stop there, for the epidemic to stop there. There are a further number of people have to become infected for that immunity to become at 60%. So infectivity reaches 80% and only then does immunity reaches 60%. So during that time period where immunity takes to develop, a further percentage of people become infected. So that is called as overshoot. Now, coming back to India's example, we discussed that about 40% of Indians need to be immune for us to have effective herd immunity, which means that if you take this example again, here they've taken an overshoot of about 20%. So let's apply that to India. So which means that for 40% of Indians to develop immunity, we need about 60 or 70% of Indians to become infected at some point in time. Now 60% of the Indian population is of 60% of 1.3 billion is around 780 million people. Now remember that 780 million people have to become infected. Now when you look at the mortality rate of COVID-19, which is the percentage of people who die from the disease from all over the world, it has been estimated currently to be somewhere between 2 and 3%. Now this may be wrong because we are still getting to know the disease. It can be reported to be higher or lower at a later date. But for our example's purpose, let's take it as a very, very modest 1%. So let's assuming that 1% of people who contract COVID-19 die. So if you come back to India, 780 million Indians contract the disease at some point. We're looking at 1% death, which is 7.8 million or 78 lakh. So if we just let the disease run wild in India, we're looking at somewhere around the range of 78 lakh deaths. So no, we should not be looking at this herd immunity strategy until an effective vaccine becomes available. That is a very simple reason. Yes, it is definitely possible to reach 30 or 70% immunity to a particular disease in the community. That is what is done by vaccination. So yeah, once a vaccine for COVID-19 becomes available, an effective vaccine becomes available, it should be possible to reach that amount of herd immunity, which will stop the disease from having further outbreaks and further epidemics all over the country and all over the world.